Question, isn't it time to put HS2 out of its considerable misery? The trains running between Birmingham and Manchester will be slower and hold fewer passengers than current ones, MPs were told yesterday. The multi-billion-pound high-speed railway plans were cut back by Rishi Sunak in October because of rising costs. The line will still be constructed between London and Birmingham, but trains will then switch to the existing West Coast main line to Manchester and beyond. And yesterday, Sir John Thompson, who's the executive chairman of HS2 even, was explaining some of this in front of a panel of MPs.
Well, construction inflation over the last 3 years has been 27%. So, for example, steel has risen by 47%, rebar 53%, concrete 48%, and so on. If you brought the 2019 number, our estimate for 2019 prices up to 2023-24 prices, you'd be adding somewhere between £8 and £10 billion further to them.
So that's on the cost side. Now, I don't know what the train equivalent is of a petrol head, and this is for a little bit for a train head or whatever. He also talked about the actual trains themselves, and I quote, "We have assumed that we wouldn't run a 400-metre train to Manchester Piccadilly. We'd have to configure the train at 250 metres long, which is roughly the same length as a Pendolino. It would have less seats than a Pendolino does now. It's also understood the trains will be shorter than the current Pendolinos at some 650 feet or 200 metres, making them half the size of the original that were planned." He goes on, the HS2 train will go the same as a Pendolino on straights, 125 miles an hour, and round the bends it'll go slower at 115 miles an hour. So an HS2 from Birmingham to Manchester will go slower than a Pendolino. So we now have the absurd costs for a railway line that will not take as many passengers and will go slower. Shall we turn to Joe Rukin, who's founder of the Stop HS2 campaign group? Dear God, we must have the nails and the hammer. We just need to get them in position, don't we? Joe, morning to you.
I think the nails and the hammer need to go through the heads of the people who came up with this thing in the first place. It's been a disaster right from start to finish, Nick. It's, every time there's news about HS2, it's bad news. And it's because the whole thing was just dreamt up by the construction industry. They wanted to build the most expensive railway in the history of the world. And it was going to be the most expensive railway mile for mile in the history of the world when it was only going to cost £32.7 billion. And that was going to get you from London to Leeds to Manchester as well as Birmingham. And now it's going to cost double that and only get you to Birmingham. It's just been one disaster after another. And I'll tell you what's happened this week with all of a sudden politicians and the Metropolitan Police paying attention to the post office scandal. This has to happen with HS2 because the thing is, this has been fraud from start to finish. The powers were basically HS2 got powers from Parliament by deception. They knew it wasn't going to cost 32.7 or 42 when they added on the cost of the trains, because originally that 32.7 didn't have the cost of the trains in it. But they knew when it went to Parliament, when MPs were voting on it, they were deceived about the costs all the way back then.
I'm going to ask you a question, and it's not fair to ask you, but I'm going to ask it anyway, Joe. Why do they cling to it? Why does one government, not have the nerve to say, look, this has been an unmitigated, but enough is enough, we're not wasting any more money?
The problem is, well, there's two things. There's a sunk cost fallacy that's basically, we've wasted all this money, so it'd be stupid not to waste even more. And also that you've got high-level lobbying on this. Because I say that the construction industry is massively powerful. There are a lot of political donors from the construction industry, and they want to build this. And in fact, even when they had the Oakerby review, the supposed independent review into HS2 that Boris Johnson had, that was actually conducted by a former chairman of HS2, he came up with his reasons for going ahead with it, but then afterwards privately admitted that, well, if we hadn't gone ahead with it, a load of the construction industry would have just fallen over. Like, we already saw what happened with Carillion. Carillion were chucked money on HS2 contracts just to try and keep them going, and it wasn't enough. And there are other firms, notably, say, Kia, for example, who were in trouble and possibly would have gone under if HS2 hadn't have been given the go-ahead. And that's the reason.
Lastly, turn you into a bit of a soothsayer from a campaigner. Do you think these trains will ever actually run?
Well, you know what? I said a very long while ago that if HS2 is built, it will never get past Crewe. And they've already cut it back to Birmingham. But the reality is that I think that there is a very good chance that a lot of this is still going to get cut even more because they haven't got the money. And the costs are just going to keep going up. And the thing is, what you've explained with the difference between the captive trains on the actual new HS2 track between London and Birmingham and the classic compatible trains, which are worse than the Pendolinos, which will run on from to Manchester, is that you've got two sets of trains you need to buy there. So do you really need to buy two sets of trains? They may well come to the conclusion that actually we could run the Pendolinos on the HS2 track. And then, all right, they might not be going as fast on HS2, but they will be going as fast on the existing track.
Joe, I will leave it there. Well done for your campaigning. Joe Rukin, founder of the Stop HS2 campaign group. Although I'm chuckling at the sheer inefficiency and crassness of some of the decision-making, but you could weep if you lived in parts of Buckinghamshire where you've lost your home or the parts of the county are unrecognisable because of the vandalism that's been wrought in the name of HS2. There's nothing to like. And indeed, of course, I appreciate you press north of Buckinghamshire and you go all the way through to Midlands that you were initially. Of course, then you're going to start pushing your way up to Cheshire. But the damage that's been done, so that is no laughing matter. Let's take some calls on this. John's in... you were once going to get the end of this line, I think. John's in Sheffield. Your view. Good morning, John.
Hi, Nick. How are you doing?
Hello,
We've spoken a few times.
We do. I recognise that. Yeah, when I saw Sheffield. Yep.
Well, listening to it again this morning and sort of thinking about the sort of post office scandal, this is... it's not the same as the post office scandal, but really I think there now needs to be a public inquiry, or there needs to be some investigation between the information that's been passed from staff at HS2 Ltd to government ministers over the past 10 years. Because it's one of two things. It's either gross incompetence or it's fraud. Because I can give you two examples. On the Phase 2B leg, which is now, as you know, already been cancelled, they've spent £2 or £3 billion with various different consultants over the past 7 or 8 years planning this route. But they didn't realise that to run trains, HS2 trains that is, from Sheffield Midland Station to Leeds, there's 13 bridges coming out of Sheffield Midland Station that the train couldn't even fit under. Now, that's either utter incompetence between the government ministers and HS2 Ltd, or somebody's trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes to keep this project going. And then if you take, for example, the Shimmer estate, which you may recall from when the HS2 Phase 2B scheme was launched, where they'd built a brand new housing estate in Mexborough. And HS2 Ltd designed the plans for this train to run straight through the middle of the housing estate. And they didn't realise there was a housing estate there until the campaign groups made the MPs aware in the local area. Now, you could say it's total utter incompetence, but it's billions and billions and billions of pounds of taxpayers' money that's been spent on this project. And to be quite frank, we're probably not even going to see the thing even getting to Birmingham, because as all the campaigners have known, and you've just had Joe on, who I've met on many occasions.
Yeah.
And we've been telling ministers, we've been telling MPs in our local constituencies, and we've even sat in front of ministers in London over the past 10 years, and we've made them aware of all these failings that we've known locally, and all of them have been ignored.
Let's just hope ITV is listening, because as I think you rightly say, there probably is a similar kind of drama series to be done